The story of the fall of the House of Usher begins with the twins, Roderick and Madeline Usher. To understand everything that happens to the Usher family, we must first learn about their past. Roderick and Madeline were born to a single mother who worked at the prestigious Fortunato Pharma back in the 1950s. Ironically, she was a devout Christian woman who didn't believe in modern medicine. There was one rule for the children: never to step near the house of Longfellow, the CEO of Fortunato at the time. Rebellious as they were, the kids did try to break in one time and were threatened by Longfellow himself. Later, when the kids were in their late teens, their mother fell ill. The kids had no idea what to do because she wouldn't take medication or consent to go to the doctor. Seeing her in so much pain, the kids decided to go to Longfellow himself. Already, it is clear that Madeline knows exactly how to manipulate people to make things work in her favor. They tell Longfellow that he is the only person their mother would listen to, but he essentially tells them to get lost. The next morning, they believe their mother is dead, and because they can't call the cops and have her embalmed, they bury her themselves. Unfortunately, this is a huge mistake because it seems she's still got some life in her. She breaks out of the coffin they built for her and comes out from the ground. Choking Roderick when he gets in her way. She lets him go when the kids beg for forgiveness and walks out of the house straight to the Longfellow home. When he comes out to greet them, she chokes him to death and then passes away herself. It is 2023, and Roderick has just buried the last of his 6 children. He has invited Auguste Dupin, the prosecutor who has been fighting against the Usher family for years, to come listen to his confession in his childhood home. Augie, as Roderick calls him, once said in court that there was an informant within the Usher family spilling secrets to the FBI. This happens to be the night Roderick sees all of his children in one place together for the last time, some of them for the last time ever. The Usher family consists of twins, of course, Roderick's current wife, Juno, who is young enough to be his grandchild. Roderick had 2 children with his first wife, Frederick, and Tamerlane. And then came the lost puppies illegitimate, Victorine, Napoleon Leo, Camille, and Prospero, the youngest of the lot. Then there are the partners, Frederick's wife, Morel, and daughter, Lenore. Victorine's partner Dr. Alessandra and Tamerlane's husband Bill. Before the dinner, Roderick's doctor meets him for a bit, shocking him a little with what he says, but it's a secret right now. When every Usher child comes of age, they get a fortune to invest in a business of their own to mint more millions than they already have. You know, keep the legacy intact. It's Prospero's turn, and his big plan is to start an exclusive luxury nightclub in his name. Unfortunately, Roderick and Madeline hate this idea because the whole point of their legacy is to change the world, which is pretty much impossible with a nightclub. Prospero is furious with the rejection, but something might be brewing in his head. Now, everyone is at the edge of their seats, pointing fingers at each other to figure out who the informant is. Roderick's great idea is to give the kid who figures out who the informant is another fortune, 50 million, whereas Madeline has had their lawyer, Pim, come up with a new NDA that includes forfeiture of inheritance. Things are getting serious right now. Pegging the kids against each other might seem like the worst thing to do at this point, but all the twins truly care about is their company, Fortunato. Roderick claims that he killed his children, to which Augie replies that the deaths were all examined, and there's no such evidence. If this is really the confession he wants to make, there's no evidence to prove it. Back to the story, we've gone back to 1979 New Year's Eve. Roderick and Madeline have come to the bar, and they seem suspiciously guilty about something. They've done something terrible, like killing somebody. Madeline asks Roderick to pull himself together, stop acting paranoid, and go make himself seen so they can have an alibi for the night. They meet an interesting bartender named Verna, who seems to know something, even mentioning that they may have had a wild night already. Verna seems to be an interesting woman, and Roderick and Madeline both feel drawn to her. She asks them what their resolution for the new year is, and Roderick replies that it is to change the world. After closing hours, both Roderick and Madeline still remain, speaking with Verna. We see a glimpse of their conversation as she mentions how it feels like they're in a dimension out of space and time. According to Roderick, whatever happened that night, the conversation with Verna resulted in the death of his entire family. At the end of the episode, at the funeral, when Roderick looks back, he sees Verna in a mask, claiming to his granddaughter, "She's here." When he looks back again, he sees his 6 dead children, and when he steps out of the church, ready to go home, he sees a clown in the car, falling backward, looking up at a raven, saying, "It is time." At the end of episode 1 of The Fall of the House of Usher, we can only assume that Roderick is talking about it being time for him to die. But, as we know, a few hours later, he's having a conversation with Augie. What happened on that fateful night that makes Roderick believe he is the reason for the deaths of his children? Let's find out in the next episode. In episode 2, we get to see a young Augie stand up for himself against his white boss and never take a step back from doing the right thing. He plans on bringing Fortunato down, with or without help. His whole argument is that Ligadone, the great pain relief medicine, is addictive, causing more harm than good for the people of the world. According to Roderick, all his children were a little bit strange, but Perry was the weirdest of them all. He had violent tendencies and didn't care for much other than fulfilling his sexual desires and proving himself to his father as a worthy son of the Usher family. Being the youngest of the illegitimate children, there is extra pressure or hate directed towards Perry from the rest of the family. He feels unwelcome in many ways, making it more important to prove to them all that he's a worthy heir. After Augie claimed there was an informant in the group, Frederick decided to blame Perry, being the youngest of the lot. Interestingly, the two of them have inherited similar traits from their father, none of which are perfect. Perry is supposed to shadow Frederick at work, and he ends up making a mess at an important meeting. Some Fortunato factories should have been destroyed a little while ago, but it seems they're still standing tall. This gives Perry the idea to use one of these buildings as the spot for his big first party. And, as you can guess, the theme he chooses is masquerade. It seemed Victorine's work was the most important to Roderick at the time because he had heard from his doctor that he was very ill, similar to his mother, with an illness called CADASIL. This disease is inherited and has symptoms such as dementia and psychiatric problems such as depression. Victorine is working on a device that could be the cure-all. A mesh that can keep the heart pumping. Roderick believes it can help him too, so he pushes Victorine to get her work done faster. Perry loves the space he's picked and decides to use the sprinklers in the building to shower rain at the perfect time for everyone to feel overexcited. Perry also gets Leo, his only half-brother whom he feels any kind of connection with, to give him some connections for drugs to make the party impeccable for the uber-rich. There's no water supply to the sprinklers, though, and Perry gets an illegal source to fill up the large tanks on top of the building to get the sprinklers going. Whoever has the gold, makes the rules. Those are the words Roderick saw in the office of Rufus Griswold, Longfellow's replacement. Roderick has a plan to share a new drug with Rufus, a drug that cures all pain in the world. Ligadone he calls it, and it's opium coated with some other stuff. This during the opioid crisis could be a huge deal because he claims it's a non-addictive, no side effect drug that can cure all pain, whatever the level of illness. Rufus doesn't like the idea and basically tells Roderick to go back to his position in the mail room. On the other hand, Madeline has also quit her job because, as a woman, she isn't taken seriously. There's a strangeness in the air between Madeline and Annabelle Lee, Roderick's wife. They don't seem to quite like each other. In 2023, Madeline works on an AI virtual version of Leonard, something Roderick can't understand is so cool, but she thinks it's revolutionary. Madeline, too, fears Perry may be the informant. Now, the hate is not one-sided when it comes to the oldest and the youngest. Perry's big plan is to invite his sister-in-law to his party so he can show his brother how much he's valued in the family. Perry gives Morel a new phone to use for the invitation to the masquerade. She seems strangely interested under the veneer of, "How dare you?" Camille seems to be betting her far too young assistants, ironically after saying her father is old enough to be his wife's grandfather. On the other hand, Tamerlane is a fan of role-playing and invites a woman over to play her part as she watches on. Camille is the marketer of the family. She's not the face of the Ushers, but she sure knows what everything is doing to make sure the media knows only what they need to. She has her assistants detail every little thing that goes on with the rest of the family for her. Morel chooses to come to Perry's party. She tells her husband and daughter that she's going to hang with the girls and isn't sure when she'll be back. While Perry is excited to have all the fun in the world and mint money for exclusive entry to his parties, his big secret is that he has cameras everywhere, and all the important people who come to these things will get blackmailed later for more money. A sustainable business deal? We're not quite certain, but Perry seems to think it's a foolproof plan. At the end, Perry finds a mysterious woman in a red cloak and a skull mask at the party. He curated the guest list himself, so he's certain he doesn't know who she is. She heads into one of the bedrooms set up for everyone at the party, and Perry follows. We know that this woman is Verna, and she asks Perry if this party is everything he'd hoped it would be. She makes him feel understood and important, telling him that it's often the moment right before you achieve something that is the most memorable, not the moment after. She suggests Perry still has time to stop it all. She says every little decision has consequences, and Perry himself is one. He doesn't quite understand what she's getting at, but he's captivated by her beauty. Maybe this was Verna's choice for him, but he doesn't care much for those. Verna leaves Perry with the hope of more fun later in the night. He heads out to enjoy the night, right before the sprinklers are about to go off. Verna, on the other hand, tells all the wait staff to head out. She whispers it into their ears and disappears. They lock the doors too, letting nobody in or out for the sprinkler show. Verna tells Morel to leave, but she doesn't quite get the memo. When the sprinklers go off, there's a rain of blood rather than water. Everyone present in the room begins to burn because of the contaminated water. In the end, Verna returns, giving Perry what you could only call a kiss of death, calling him a beautiful boy with his face fully melted away. She puts her mask on his face and walks away. Who would have thought that partying like there's no tomorrow could be the reason for your death? Episode 3 of The Fall of the House of Usher takes us right back to the scene of Prospero's death. It's a gross sight for all, but somehow Arthur Pym, the Usher's lawyer, and private investigator, you could say, is capable of walking into this room full of burnt bodies and feeling nothing but the need to remove all of the links between the masquerade and the Ushers. After scanning through the scene, Pym Reaper, as Camille calls him, picks up Prospero's phone to save the day for the Ushers yet again. Pym is stopped in his stride by a corpse grabbing his foot. It's Morel, who has somehow managed to survive the massacre, but will she survive Frederick's wrath? We'll soon find out. It's a shame that Prospero had never listened to what the problem with those buildings was, because if he had paid attention, he would have known that the tanks were filled with toxins from years of Fortunato's mistakes. Fortunato was never good for the environment, but they didn't know what to do with these corrosive substances, so they hid them away. The plan was to get rid of them when the buildings were brought down too. Now, Camille has to deal with the PR mess that this whole situation has created, and she plans on making it so that the whole world grieves with the Ushers instead of blaming them. According to Camille's assistants, Victorine's loose ethics in the hospital haven't gone unnoticed. Her great experiment isn't working, and the many chimpanzees she's been testing the device on have died on the table. She pumps them up with adrenaline to make it look like it's working, until it doesn't anymore. According to rumors, she's been replacing the animal herself and carrying out the pieces of the dead monkey in her luxury bag late at night for no one to know. On the other hand, at the hospital, Victorine happens upon a sickly-looking Verna, and she gets a glance at Verna's reports. Verna would be the perfect candidate for Victorine's heart mesh, and so she convinces the woman that she should try this new procedure. Camille and Leo seem to have a better bond than the rest of the kids. Apart from Victorine and Camille having an actual animosity towards each other, the others seem decently civil. At least the ones that are left. Camille and Leo actually talk about their sad feelings with each other for a little bit until she leaves because his friends arrive for a little grieving get-together. Camille is impressed with Leo's boyfriend too and tells him he should bring Julius to the family gatherings. Now is when we hear a monologue about lemons and how to market them, as a metaphor for how the Ushers could make anything the most desirable product in the world. Roderick doesn't take responsibility for any of the problems caused by Ligadone because, 1, he didn't make it, and 2, people are stupid. Back in the 1960s, Roderick gets flipped off by Rufus, who basically steals his pitch and buys off the pharmaceutical company that designed Ligadone. He goes on to tell Roderick that an idea is just a brain fart, so he pays him off with $500 and talks about his future plans with his new buddy. Back at home, Madeline is livid with the thought of how insulting this whole situation is. Fortunato is their birthright. Madeline reminds Roderick who they are, and if Roderick plays his cards right, he'll be able to pry Fortunato back for them from Rufus' clutches. Annabelle overhears this entire conversation and tells Roderick that she doesn't quite like Madeline. She's happy that they can finally get the medication they need for their son with the $500 check and keep their family afloat. Money isn't everything to her, but is it for Roderick? Leo wakes up after a party and finds Julius' cat dead with a knife in her neck right in the hallway. When he first sees the blood, he wonders if he's killed Julius himself, but he's relieved when it's the cat. He quickly cleans it up and makes it look as if nothing's happened and everything is normal. On the other hand, Camille's assistants are now in love with each other and can't keep up the dynamic she asked of them before. She basically fires them for failing to keep up with their side of the contract. Tamerlane has a woman who usually shows up for her roleplay sessions, but she's late on this day. It turns out she's been replaced by Verna because she's under the weather. Verna is quick to get into action, and she needs no help understanding what they're doing there. Bill, too, seems to be okay with it. Angry with her assistants, Camille has to go do the dirty work herself. At least they've given her the tip she needs to get Victorine in trouble. Camille goes to the Rue Morgue, as they call it, the place where the chimpanzees are kept. Verna is somehow there too. She stops Camille from going in as the security guard in charge. Camille, who is very proud of her status, tells Verna that she has to obey her because if she doesn't, she'll lose not just her job but everything that she has. Camille is too proud because of her family name, something that she uses to her benefit. This is her big vice because it makes her feel like she's on top of the world. Camille takes a few pictures of the monkeys, and Verna shows up inside. She gives her a lecture about the birth of animal testing and what it's become today. Verna starts to move like a chimpanzee herself, telling Camille how her job of marketing the Usher family is basically cleaning up dirt after them. Verna wonders why Camille and Victorine hate each other because, deep down, they're pretty much the same. They could have been incredible allies against the rest of the family, the illegitimate daughters of the Ushers, but instead they ended up hating each other. At the end, Verna shows Camille how Victorine cut her up too and pumped her up with adrenaline in order to make it look like the procedure worked. When Camille takes a picture of her, she's a chimpanzee in the camera, and she attacks Camille. 2 down, 4 to go. In episode 4, Leo visits a pet store where Verna sits across from him, looking like a cat person herself. It's incredible how her personality changes with each sibling. Leo finds the black cat he's looking for, which is the perfect replacement for Julius' cat. Instead of telling his boyfriend that he's killed his cat, Leo just replaces her. Leo, too, offers Verna all the world's riches for this cat because she tells him she's not available. At home, Leo gets scratched by the little thing, and she runs away. When Leo finds out that Camille is dead, he's truly devastated. We saw earlier that the two of them got along pretty well. If she had just stayed back with him, she may have survived. Roderick feels like he's dealt with enough and reminds his family that they're a wall against the world, and this is a battle that they have to fight together. So all he wants to hear is a battle cry, "Sir, yes, sir." Ironically, this is exactly what Rufus asked of him back in the day when Roderick went to him about Augie, who had just come up to his doorstep and asked him to be a mole at the company. It seems Leo is the only person in the family grieving the deaths of his siblings. The rest are only interested in keeping the clock ticking for their respective work. Leo's obvious coping mechanism is to keep getting high until he becomes numb. At this time, the cat becomes his worst enemy. He sees her popping out of the wardrobe at him, and whatnot. Julius knows it's too much, but he's also slightly afraid of talking about Leo. Roderick now wonders if Camille had some information on Victorine being the informant. He can't think of any other reason for Camille to have been in her office. Roderick decides to make Victorine talk. He needs to threaten her work, specifically the money going into it. There's a trail of messed up chimps behind Camille's death that has to be cleaned up after all. Victorine lightens the mood by saying they're going to do human trials, and that changes everything. At the same time, Pim hands over a mobile phone to Frederick that doesn't look like it belongs to his wife but is found with her belongings. While Roderick spends time in a basement with a brick wall, Madeline tries to find a bar they visited many years ago. In episode 4, Verna is excited about her surgery in front of oblivious Victorine, but she needs to make sure that Al, the actual doctor on the case, has approved her as the right candidate. It's only been Victorine giving her the information thus far. Leo can't sleep and asks Julius to indulge him a little, claiming people grieve differently. He finds a dead rat under his pillow and removes the sheets immediately. While telling this story, in the present day at his childhood home, Roderick explains how Leo, like most of his children, picked up the trait of displacing their anger and projecting it on the weak, people they like. While doing so, Leo's body falls in front of him, leaving him completely shocked and lashing out in front of Augie. The man can't understand what's happening because he can't see Leo, but Roderick has an outburst, and Augie stops him from showing him his anger. Roderick apologizes and tells Augie that he's always liked him. Augie visited Roderick back when he worked for Rufus to get the dirt on the company. He found forged documents for drug trials that were signed by Roderick, but it was all a lie. He never signed such consent forms because he never knew about them. This is when Roderick tries to speak to Rufus about Augie's findings and gets told to stand on the battlefield for Fortunato. At home, Madeline thinks it's a great idea to be a double agent and make it look like he's on Rufus' side so he can become the hero of Fortunato. Madeline tells Roderick to befriend Augie and do the work he asks for, even going to trial as a witness. Julius asks Leo politely to do him a favor and take it slow on the drugs for just a little while. In the same breath, Leo gets a visit from Frederick, asking for drugs to deal with everything that is happening, the fact that Morel lied to him. Leo hands him some cocaine, and when he's putting the box back, he gets scratched in the eye by the cat. Frederick doesn't seem to care much and takes his drugs to shift his focus from Maury. After a while, Leo starts finding more dead animals in the house, making him call Verna for help. She comes immediately and tells Leo that cats are apex predators, so they have a tendency to hunt. Leo doesn't really care for what she's saying, he needs the cat gone. He shows her a tub full of dead animals. Verna tells him that the cat is in the walls, and he starts to hear it too. While she's talking to him about how cats are a lot like his father, the cat jumps onto him from behind and holds onto his neck, wounding him deeply. He grabs the cat and squishes it into its eyes with his thumbs, going in for the kill. When he throws the cat away from him and looks at Verna, her eye pops out, and she licks her blood in a cat-like motion. At home, Roderick wants to have a good time with his wife Juno, but he ends up seeing Prospero's burnt-up body. This is when he admits to Madeline that he has Codicil like their mother. Madeline, strong-willed as ever, tells him that he will get through this with the help of Victorine's heart miracle, and he'll be back to normal. Roderick finally dares to say he saw something terrible, but she doesn't care to hear it. On the other hand, when Julius returns home from work, he's shocked to see that Leo has shredded the entire house. Somehow, Julius dares to find his boyfriend, even in the scary scenario in front of him. Leo, hammer in hand, goes to the only plain wall left, and what he sees inside is a dead Verna with the black cat sitting on her shoulder. When he asks Julius if he can see what's on the wall, Julius wears a blank expression. When Leo looks back at the wall, there's nothing there. He looks out at the balcony now, and the cat sits on the railing. He goes swinging at it with the hammer, and before Julius can stop him, he falls off, crashing to the ground with a big thud. At the end of the fall of the House of Usher, episode 4, there's nothing in the tub, which was supposed to be filled with dead animals, and the black cat with the Gucci collar worn by Julius cat comes and licks a dead Leo. A reminder of Leo's guilt in his last breath. 3 down, 3 to go. Who will be next? Of the twins, Madeline happens to be the more strong-willed. The one with the big ideas and bigger dreams. She's a genius, as we know, so it makes sense that she's ambitious too. Being a woman in the 70s who lost her parents early and had to take care of herself and her brother made her a force to be reckoned with. Madeline tells Verna on New Year's Eve that she will be satisfied when she learns to be immortal. They kiss when the ball drops, and somehow, Madeline feels a connection with Verna. Now that 3 of the kids are dead and the informant still hasn't been found, the 3 remaining siblings are worried, but more importantly, Madeline thinks Verna and Roderick may have had a kid, and that kid is now trying to come for the others to become the sole inheritor. She hires bodyguards for the remaining kids, who follow them everywhere. Vic is the only illegitimate child remaining, and that's a little bit frightening for her. She's feeling her morale shake a little. On the other hand, Frederick has taken Morel back home to get her treated there, but he's more interested in figuring out what she was doing at Perry's party. Victorine tries to convince Al that the patient she's found is the perfect candidate for the heart mesh. Al is completely against using the heart mesh on a human being because the chimpanzee died. Al doesn't know Victorine's secrets, but she's completely against this unethical practice. Al finally has a meltdown and tells Vic that it's true that none of the ushers are good people. Al decides to leave Vic, and in a rage, Vic throws something at the door before she goes. At the hospital, Madeline visits Vic and has a similar conversation with her as her dad did, wondering if she's the informant. Vic gets more paranoid as time passes because all she wants is for her heart mesh to work on a human. At this point in The Fall of the House of Usher, episode 5, we see Augie have a conversation with the judge and Pim. He suggests that it's really strange how the ushers never get convicted for any of their crimes, even though the bodies and paperwork keep piling up. He's worked really hard to try to catch them over the years, but it's almost a supernatural force that protects him. In the old house in 2023, Roderick finally asks Augie who the informant was, and he replies that there never was one. It was a tactic he wanted to apply to get the kids to talk, to stir the pot, and to make one of them fall under pressure and break. It never worked, though. In 1979, Madeline met Rufus with the offer of her new algorithm that would help track drug movement for Fortunato. Rufus is quick to understand exactly what this means. All the forged documents from Fortunato would be digitized for the police. He insults Madeline by making promiscuous advances at her, but she's able to face him with pride. At this point, everyone in the office knows that Roderick and Madeline are Longfellow's children. Rufus tells Madeline to stay in her lane and stand by his side if she wants anything to do with Fortunato. She tells Augie and Roderick about what happened, making sure Augie knows that they're on his side. Victorine begins to hear a strange chirping sound when she's at the hospital. She's talking to Verna about the operation and how Al will be the doctor to do it. Verna is uncertain about the situation, though, and just wants to hear from Al that this is safe for her. She compares the feeling to the intuition horses have about their rider, sensing their nervousness, implying that she knows something is going on with Vic. Tamerlane, in the middle of this whole mess, is still trying to launch her new product. Bill tells her to take it slow and get some sleep because he's worried she hasn't slept for days. Tamerlane has a huge argument with Bill because she couldn't care less for sleep. She insults and disrespects him by talking about how he was just a pea in the pod who was methodically chosen for Tamerlane's vision. He was never special, he just had the best viewership as a live fitness expert. Bill is the name that markets Tamerlane's product, but she's the one who has done all the work for it. She says she's seen Verna in multiple videos with Bill, making it seem as if Bill and she have been seeing each other outside of the little arrangement at home. Bill argues that it was never his idea to get other women into their lives, it was all Tamerlane. She's clearly imagining things because of the lack of sleep, but Bill is too hurt by her calling him an asset and decides to leave. Now, in the fall of the House of Usher, Roderick has lost 3 of his children, and he's tired of losing his mind. He spends more time in that basement, and he's also hearing bell sounds coming from the other side. Roderick thinks about taking too many Ligadone pills, then jumping off his building, and other ways of offing himself, but to no avail. He's a coward, after all. He visits Victorine, apologizing for putting too much pressure on her. In truth, he was just worried about himself, so he took it all out on her. Vic kept on some loud music because she could still hear that strange sound that other people were unable to hear. Now, when she turns off the music, Roderick can hear it too. It's a strange, unknown sound, and Vic tries to go into the room to check up on Al. In the conversation Vic had with Al, just before she left, we know she threw something hard at the door. It happened to have hit Al in the head, basically killing her. Vic had forgotten that had happened, and now she remembers. She tells Roderick to come to see what she's done because it's a big achievement. She sees a scalpel in her hand, meaning she's done something unimaginable. There's a stench in the room when Roderick makes it there, and to his utter shock, Al sits on a bench, completely bloodied, with the heart device punctured into her chest. That's where the sound is coming from because Vic never closed her up. At the same time, Vic is having delusions and thinks she's talking to Al, who is alive in her mind. She's taken over by the guilt of lying to everybody, not only about the chimpanzees but about Al as well. Roderick tries to talk Vic into stepping out of the room to relax a little bit. He tells her that Al looks quite dead, but she doesn't believe him. Vic tells Roderick that she'll fix everything. She moves from consciousness to delusions, finally putting a knife at her dad's throat. At the end of The Fall of the House of Usher episode 5, Vic reminds Roderick that success is everything and she will go to any lengths to achieve it. For a moment, Vic's tone changes. She tells Roderick that it would have been better if he had jumped, but because he didn't, Vic now plunges the knife into her chest in front of her devastated father. Victorine's death was ruthless, with Roderick witnessing the whole thing. We know Tamerlane hasn't been sleeping at all, thanks to her fear that the Goldbug launch might flop. Because of this, she starts to lose time while working on the launch. She doesn't realize when she's crossed out the whole speech just to write her own name in capital letters. She's leaving things in weird places and doesn't know when she's had her coffee. Finally, she decides she really needs to take a nap, so she takes some pills to help her even after having no sleep for many days. In the present day, Augie has a tough time understanding how Roderick knows about all of the kids' deaths in detail when he doesn't witness them. Roderick tells Augie that his kids told him what happened, making Augie more confused. After Victorine's death, Roderick returns to his office because it's a PR mess if anyone figures out he was right in front of Victorine when she pushed a knife into her chest. Madeline is still stuck on the Verna and thinks she got to Victorine even with the bodyguard in place. Roderick reminds her that he witnessed her death. Madeline reminds Roderick that Victorine had a seat at the table, that is, as a shareholder. This gives Roderick something else to focus on again, sublimation, remember? Juno is all alone in the gigantic house and feels lonely. She tries to call her husband, but he doesn't respond. On TV, she sees the news of Victorine and Al's deaths, making her more worried. She's also taking a high dose of Ligadone, which she wants to stop doing because she feels fine now. Juno met Roderick as a patient who needed saving. She was in so much pain from an accident that only Ligadone could have saved her. At this time, everyone seems to be out of control. Frederick promises Lenore that specialists are on their way to help her mother, but somehow, they don't show up. Roderick sees all his dead kids more often than not, and Tamerlane has an imaginary conversation with Bill. At home, Juno gets a visit from Tamerlane, who has always hated her. After all, she's a stepmother much younger than Tamerlane herself. Juno tells Tamerlane that she married Roderick because she wanted to be a part of something big, she wanted to feel like she belonged. On the outside, the whole family looks like an unbreakable wall, but she's at her loneliest because no one even visits her in the large, empty house with too many rooms and no people. In the old house, during his confession, Roderick tells Augie that there is almost nothing Pim can't do. He's capable of doing anything for the Ushers because, when he was in his 20s, he went on an expedition across the world. Amongst telling Roderick's kids interesting stories such as the Earth is hollow, Pim told them that when he got to the North Pole, he found a place he called Ultham Thule. This is where the beings that are not in our time and space exist. A different dimension, if you will, but on his journey, Pim saw the worst things he could, people eating each other and worse. Augie needs some papers copied for the trial and asks Roderick to bring as many as possible. Annabelle thinks it's a dangerous task, and she's starting to have second thoughts about Roderick's work with Augie. After Victorine's death, Pim is tasked by Madeline with tracking down Verna. He finds strange images of her with the most influential families dating back to 1901. It's impossible because she hasn't aged a day in the pictures. There's a conversation Madeline remembers, but Roderick refuses to acknowledge it. He, too, remembers Verna clearly, but he's unwilling to admit that she has anything to do with the deaths of his children, even if the evidence proves otherwise. Lenore is thrilled to notice that her mother is getting better and is even able to talk to her. She tells her father immediately but wonders where the doctors he promised are. Whenever she's at home, nobody is around to help her mother. Frederick tells Lenore not to worry because he'll take care of it all. On the other hand, he's been giving Morel a paralytic, keeping her unconscious for hours because she lied to him, and he also thinks she was having an affair with Perry. It's time for the launch of Tamerlane's project, and she's more nervous than ever. Her father, on the other hand, is stuck in the basement talking to a brick wall, hearing the sound of bells on the other side. Madeline reminds him that 2 of his children are still alive and very much need him. He's supposed to show his support for his daughter. The important thing is Fortunato and whatever is left of the family. Madeline gives Tamerlane a pep talk, too, before leaving her alone with her thoughts. As soon as she has to go on stage, Tamerlane sees Verna in her place. She somehow manages to save face by directing her not-so-professional words to the audience as a joke in her speech. Soon, she sees Verna in the audience, too. She gets more frustrated by the minute, making her fumble her speech and also distracted from Goldbug. This is the thing she's lost so much sleep on. She's been working hard for months for this launch, and now she's goofing it up because of this one woman. An imposter. Tamerlane sees Verna in the images that are supposed to be of her and Bill. Pictures of Tamerlane in Forbes magazine now have Verna's face plastered on them. Ultimately, a video of Bill and Verna in the bedroom listening to Tamerlane's instructions comes on the screen. She screams for it to be turned off and furiously picks up the mic stand when the video doesn't stop. She breaks all the screens on the stage, and then, when she can't bear the sight of Verna in the audience, she lashes out by throwing the mic stand at her, which hits Juno right in the head. At the same time, Madeline sees Verna too and tries to walk towards her, grabbing at her, but she disappears into thin air. Just like her sisters, Tamerlane is also afraid of being replaced. Tamerlane's strange desire turned into her biggest fear. The big speech she gave her husband about being an asset has clearly scarred her. Tamerlane rushes home and sees Verna there as herself. Verna picks up the phone, telling Bill that she doesn't know why the launch was such a mess. Tamerlane picks up the fireplace poker and swings it at Verna, who disappears. Every time she sees a mirror, Tamerlane takes a swing because she sees Verna on the other side. It seems Tamerlane was a twin, but she absorbed her twin in the womb. Verna pretends to be that twin who has come back to get her with her tendrils. Tamerlane has broken through all the pressure of the Usher name. That's why she's always seen her siblings as competition. At the end of episode 6 of The Fall of the House of Usher, Tamerlane gives in and admits she's messed up everything. She finally gives up, ready to be taken by Verna. Verna offers Tamerlane some sleep, and as she looks up at the mirror on top of the bed, she sees Verna again. Tamerlane jumps up, smashing the giant mirror and falling on a shard. Finally, a huge piece lodges itself in her neck. How did the bodyguard not hear the noise from all the mirrors smashing? It's weird, but this means only Frederick remains. With just 2 episodes remaining in The Fall of the House of Usher, we can imagine that all our questions will finally be answered. What did Madeline and Roderick do all those years ago that made them so paranoid? More importantly, why does Roderick think he killed his children when clearly they all died due to circumstances, none of which involved Roderick directly? The Pit and the Pendulum is a dark tale of torture and leaves an eerie mark on the reader. Now, will it be Frederick who gets tortured to death? Or will he torture someone else? Now we know that Roderick betrayed Augie, but up until now, the story goes that Roderick was doing everything in his power to support him. They even rehearsed together in the wee hours of the night to make sure Roderick wouldn't mess up the trial. At this time, Roderick started showing significant changes in his behavior, becoming impatient with the kids because of all the stress he was going through. In 2023, Augie tells Roderick that he only trusted him because of Annabelle. He thought if a sweet woman like Annabelle, a pure human being, could trust Roderick, then so could he. We know that Roderick lost her later, but we are not sure how just yet. Augie claims that there was only one good Usher, Annabelle Lee, but Roderick reminds him that there is Lenore too. At this point, Roderick has started to act strange and stopped caring about the business, and the board wants to remove Roderick from his CEO position. Frederick is the last vote, but Madeline has the idea of replacing Roderick as CEO through her algorithm pitch, and she asks Pim to take up the task for her. To tell the board that she'll be perfect, keeping the business in the family. Now Frederick has plastered the walls of Morel's room with pictures of them and their marriage. He wants her to see what she's lost by going to Perry's party. He's still giving her the drugs, leaving her paralyzed and unconscious for the rest of the day. He knows Tamerlane has taken her own life using a fireplace poker, which confuses the heck out of him. Now, he's been taking too much cocaine, making him highly charged and especially evil. His plan is to torture Morel by removing her teeth. Her smile is what made him fall for her in an instant, so he can't bear to see it anymore. As in, an "I don't have you, so no one can" kind of situation. The factories that were supposed to be destroyed still stand tall, and Roderick is at the end of his rope. He tells Frederick to get on it immediately because he's in charge of them now and there's nothing else that Roderick is relying on him for. Roderick reminds Frederick that Perry's blood and a huge crime scene with their family name all over it still stands, so something has to be done ASAP. On the other hand, Juno asks her doctor about the withdrawal symptoms of giving up Ligadone. Frederick returns home to Morel, and while he's tending to her drugs, he calls the demolition guys on the phone. Something strange happens during his conversation, where he goes completely blank and Morel looks at him strangely. It definitely looks like something caused by the drugs he's ingested. Then, Frederick brings a pair of pliers, gives Morel her dose, and gets to work on her teeth. Lenore is the only sane person in the family, and she's had enough of her father's shenanigans. He doesn't let her see her mother, and there have been no specialists since she's been brought back home. Outside the room, Lenore finds her dad and raises her voice at him, urging him to do something about her mother. She tells him he's been acting strange and even smells weird, and Frederick completely loses it. He tells her that just because she's his daughter, she can't speak to him in whatever manner she likes. His hubris has addled his mind, and he's going the extra mile thanks to the cocaine. He leaves, and Lenore heads to the room where Morel is. The doors are locked, and she breaks them open. At this time in the fall of the House of Usher, episode 7, we're back in the room where Roderick is making his confession. Augie is losing his patience too. He was here for a confession, but all he's getting is a deluded man's story about his children's deaths. Roderick admits to having hallucinations of his children, claiming that next while he's talking to Augie, he'll see a vision of Frederick the way he saw the other kids. But in actuality, he sees Annabelle Lee with baby Tam and 4-year-old Freddie. He picks up the little boy in his hands, but before he knows it, Freddie's body splits into two in his hands. Augie watches as he sees nothing in Roderick's hands. Back in 1979, Roderick sat in the witness seat to talk against Fortunato's wrongdoings. But, like a chameleon, he changes his colors, telling the jury that he in fact signed those papers and nothing was forged. Madeline and he have basically fooled Augie into thinking that they were going to help him, but their whole plan was to make it seem like that and get on the good side of Rufus. Roderick even tells the jury that he was coerced by Augie, who harassed him and his family, because he may have had a personal vendetta against Rufus. Roderick is now the hero of Fortunato, and they're basically unstoppable. Annabelle waits outside where the trial is happening, but Roderick gets arrested for perjury. This is the end of the straw for Annabelle, though, because none of the money in the world is going to mend her relationship with Roderick after the trick he's just pulled. Sometime before Frederick's death, Madeline finally goes back to the old house to meet Verna, who is waiting for her. The conversation they had with her back in 1979, a faded memory for Roderick, is fresh in Madeline's memory. She wants new terms for a deal that she made with Verna back then. Verna tells her that she's asking for the impossible, reminding her that she's not a woman. In episode 7 of The Fall of the House of Usher, we finally learn that Verna is Lady Death. A Grim Reaper, if you will. She tells Madeline that if they hadn't made that deal many years ago, her life may have turned out completely different. Verna tells Madeline that she's always been one of her favorites because she pushes boundaries and tries her best to get on top, no matter the consequences. Like Roderick said, there's one good Usher, Lenore. Lenore saves her mother after seeing her mutilated face, calling her father an abuser. She chooses to save her mother, not keeping her mouth shut about her father for the sake of the Usher name. Juno tells Roderick that she is done taking Ligadone and she's going to get herself off it. He tells her that's a stupid decision because not only would it be 3 years of agony, but the world would also wonder why Juno Usher would toss aside their own drug. Juno realizes it was a mistake marrying Roderick, and he clarifies this when he calls her beautiful when she was bedridden by a terrible accident and could take a lot of Ligadone with no side effects. The most any patient has ever taken. In their conversation all those years ago, Verna gave Madeline and Roderick a way out of their sad lives, and now she offers Madeline clarity through a poem. She recites Edgar Allan Poe's The City in the Sea. In episode 7 of The Fall of the House of Usher, Verna explains how she, Death herself, has always ruled over the Ushers all these years. She compares their family to hell itself, calling them more evil than the underworld. An inevitable fate that awaits them. Whatever they've achieved, whatever they've done, is waiting to be exposed the second their family is done for. As high as the walls get and as rich as they get, the more they become a doomed city. Like us, at first, Madeline doesn't get what she means, but she looks at Verna with teary eyes, having a deep melancholic feeling from within. Frederick goes to the building where Perry died. He tells the guys who are ready with their wrecking ball to destroy the building to wait 5 minutes for his signal. He goes inside and takes another hit of what he thinks is his cocaine. He pees on the spot where Perry died, but before he can zip up his pants, he falls to the floor, paralyzed. Remember when Morel looked at him strangely? Verna was behind him, telling him to pack Morel's drug in his cocaine packet. He lies on the floor, pants unzipped, and Verna shows up, telling him that this is not how she wanted to do it, but he went and tortured his wife with the pliers, so he deserves the worst death possible. Freddy's big dream was always to prove to his father that he was good enough, being the first son and all. Freddy always wanted love, but instead, he got pressured and pushed away. Sins of the father, they say, but Freddy picked up the pliers himself. A metal beam with a very dangerous-looking base oscillates over Frederick, dangerously close, as he watches the building fall apart with Verna talking to him on the side. Finally, it reaches his body, slicing him slowly and painfully in half. At the end of The Fall of the House of Usher, episode 7, Madeline comes to Roderick at his spot in the basement. Madeline reminds Roderick that Verna had said they come into the world together and go out together, only then can there be a deal. She reminds him how much she loves him and that he's being a hero, saving them all, not quite sure why considering everyone is already dead except Lenore. She gives him Ligadone, telling him to take a bunch at once, tricking him into dying alone, it seems. Roderick is too caught up with everything that's happened and actually follows through. He falls to the floor, presumably dead, but Verna returns, telling him she won't let him go so easily. Verna brings Roderick back to life after Madeline tried to loophole her by getting Roderick to take his own life. Now Roderick asks Verna what her price is. Verna finds it amusing, but she tells him that a Fortunato representative has finally taken the step to bring the whole thing down. Pim always tells the ushers how to conduct themselves in front of the police or media, but Lenore doesn't listen and calls out her father in front of the whole world. The big mistake Augie's boss made back in the day was thinking that they had slain the dragon when Roderick lost his children and seemingly his company to his own sister. Roderick's surprise return didn't hinder Madeline, though, she just thought she had done the math right. Unfortunately for her, Death doesn't care about math. Now, while listening to Roderick, Augie tells him that he doesn't know what justice for the Usher's wrongdoings is, but he'll know it when he sees it. Roderick talks about how Tamerlane and Frederick were good kids while they were with Annabelle, but the second Roderick thought they were old enough, he showed them the lifestyle that money could buy them, and they picked him. Whatever humanity was in them, Roderick sucked it all out with his money. But somehow, Lenore managed to pick up on her grandmother's qualities. During the funeral that day, young Annabelle came to Roderick too. She talked about how he stole their children from her and squeezed their personalities out of them until they became shells of ushers yearning just for money. She used to tell people that the kids went to Roderick because he was rich, but right now, she sees his poverty very clearly. Roderick and Madeline got everything they wanted but at the price of becoming completely poor. Roderick did love Annabelle until he chose to sacrifice that love for Fortunato. Now, along with the deaths of his children, he grieves for that relationship. Annabelle had felt alone when the kids left her, and killed herself all those years ago. After that conversation, we're looped back to the first episode, where Roderick fell to the floor in front of the church, looking up at a raven. The finale of the series gives us all the answers. At the New Year's party back in 1979, Rufus was the person wearing the purple clown costume. After telling the whole team at Fortunato that Roderick was their new hero, he proceeded to go to the basement with Madeline, thinking she had finally yielded to him. They had drugged the man while offering him a glass of sherry. In the basement, they tied him up. Now comes the scariest part. Rufus was screaming about how this basement would be the new foundation of the Fortunato building. The twins took his words very seriously and put him inside the wall. When Rufus comes to, he thinks they're joking with him at first, cementing the bricks in place in front of him. The twins could have threatened Rufus and let him go, shown him what they were capable of, and then made him confess and resign, but instead, they chose to bury the truth while it was alive. This was their plan all along, to get Fortunato, their birthright, right in their own hands. Now that Roderick proved himself, with Rufus not showing up, being in a wall and all, he would easily be the new candidate. This is when they left the party to go make themselves seen elsewhere for an alibi. At the end of the night, with everyone gone and just Madeline, Roderick, and Verna at the bar, Verna brings out the real deal. She tells the twins that if she offered them a lifetime of luxury and gave them everything they wanted right now, what would they do? Madeline makes a joke out of it, but Verna reminds them of everything they've wanted, adding extra sugar to the deal with no legal consequences for anything they do. Verna tells them she just wants to see what they would do with all that, no questions asked, but the next generation would bear the brunt of it all. She tells them that they would have the world, but just before Roderick dies, his bloodline will die too. Their avarice taking over, the twins take the deal, thinking the kids would enjoy the best life, living gilded lives with no struggle the way they did. The bar never existed, and soon, the twins forgot about the deal or what happened with Verna that night. Roderick even goes as far as to call it a folie à deux, but it really did happen. In the fall of the House of Usher episode 8, after Frederick's death, Pym actually finds Verna in the old, ragged house. He tries to kidnap her, but she's just playing tricks on him. She offers Pym a deal, too, because once the Ushers fall, all his crimes will be out in the open for the world to see. Pym declines the offer, though, because he knows better. Pym doesn't even have collateral to offer up. He's seen too many terrible things in the world, and he's finally ready to pay the price. Now comes the hardest part, the most bleak moment of the series. Roderick has been talking about how great Lenore is and how she's the only good one of them. Just a few hours earlier, after the funeral, Lenore had come home with her grandfather to make sure he was all right. She tells him that it might be a good idea to let go of Fortunato now, and he says maybe she will be able to make it a good thing sometime in the future. Lenore promises Roderick she'll try her best and heads to her room to rest for the night. Verna's there waiting for her, and she tells her that her mother will be all right in 3 years thanks to Lenore saving her. She will set up a charity in Lenore's name to help abuse victims, and she'll save millions of lives in the future. Would this be a kind of poetic justice? Bodies for bodies. We can't really say, but Lenore is happy to hear it all. Finally, Verna tears up, saying sometimes her job, which she loves very much, becomes hard. This is one of those moments. She lightly touches Lenore's forehead, killing her in an instant. Ultimately, Roderick finds Lenore dead in her bed, realizing it was his entire bloodline. Now, he makes his way to the old house, calling Augie to tell him the story. The thing that's been texting Roderick is the algorithm that Madeline came up with, a fake Lenore. But the thing is stuck on the word nevermore, just like in The Raven. Never again will they cause pain. Roderick recites Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven as the scene of him finding Lenore's body plays out. He drives to the company and sees all his dead children and Lenore at the prestigious board table. He blames others for his actions and for wanting more, but Verna shows up, sending him off to the old house after showing him his overwhelmingly large body count. She shows him his real legacy, telling him that their business is almost done. Just before Augie showed up at the house, Madeline did. She knows about Lenore's death, and Roderick tells her that Verna has given them some time to talk, so there must be some business they must finish up. Roderick calls the house their tomb, so he's been spending some time there over the past few days, bringing some things to bury with them. It wouldn't be Mike Flanagan's show without a few monologues here and there. Now it's Madeline's turn, and she goes from blaming people to talking about bodily autonomy for women and finally finishing up with the desire for consumption. Madeline is eager to tell the world that Roderick and she didn't do anything wrong except build the life for themselves that they wanted from hardship, pain, and suffering. She tells Roderick that if death wants her, she has to look her straight in the eyes. Madeline should have been careful with her words. Roderick has spiked her drink, just like they had all those years ago with Rufus. Just like Victorine mutilated her partner's body, Roderick gets to work on Madeline's eyes. Verna always called Madeline Cleopatra, so Roderick removed Madeline's eyes and placed the blue sapphires of Queen Tuzret there as a gift. Roderick tells Augie that he sent her off as a queen and goddess, but Augie wonders if Madeline has actually died. Roderick tells Augie that, at the end of the day, they did actually change the world, even if it may not have been ideal. Roderick gives Augie his confession, saying that he always knew that he would end up killing millions of people to change the world. The biggest lie they told was that they could extinguish pain. There's no way this is possible, really. As a joke, Roderick says if he put those words on a bottle of Ligadone, he could have still sold it. Augie's fear is answered with a bloody Madeline jumping out of the basement, similar to their mother all those years ago, grabbing for Roderick's neck. It was almost as if their mother had predicted their end.
Nevermore.
As they fall together to the floor, so does the foundation of the broken house. Augie rushes out and watches as the house crashes to the ground, obviously killing the twins together. Augie sees Verna on top of the wreckage, but in the blink of an eye, she's a raven. Juno inherited what was left of Fortunato. She dissolved the company and replaced it with the Phoenix Foundation, a rehabilitation facility. Pim was arrested and became the only convicted in the Fortunato case, never uttering a word in his defense. Augie gives a satisfying goodbye speech to his friend Roderick, telling him to keep his rationale to himself and leaving the recording at his grave. Justice has been served in many ways, and Augie gets to go back to his family, calling himself the richest man in the world. He retires, and finally, with no regrets, even though his biggest case ended in the blink of an eye, everyone is dead. Verna shows up one last time at the graves of the Ushers, placing each of their misfortunes, or, should we say, mistakes, on top of their stones as a reminder of what they did. On Lenore's stone, she places a black feather with a white rose on it, a representation of Lenore's freedom from what could have been. And that is how the Usher family fell. Thank you for joining us on this journey. And I hope you enjoyed the series of the fall of the House of Usher.